What happens when an entire galaxy's apex predators meet their match in the most unlikely of places? When beings who have conquered star systems through pure terror discover that Earth's deadliest weapon isn't technology, nuclear power, or even human ingenuity, but something far more primal and infinitely more dangerous? The Zephyrian Empire believed they had seen every form of warfare. Their bioengineered apex hunters were living nightmares that had brought 1,000 worlds to their knees. Nothing in the galaxy could stand against creatures designed to be the perfect killing machines. They were wrong. Because on a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, evolution had already created something far more terrifying. Something that didn't hunt for conquest or glory, but for love. Something that would tear through dimensions themselves if it meant protecting what mattered most. The aliens thought they were unleashing hell. They had no idea they were about to meet a mother protecting her child. The observation deck of the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with barely contained excitement. Commander Thexvar adjusted his ceremonial armor plates, the bioluminescent markings along his neck ridge pulsing with anticipation. Today would mark another glorious victory for the Empire, another world brought to heel by their ultimate weapons. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had watched entire civilizations surrender at the mere sight of his fleet. Lieutenant ZYXRA, her own neck ridge flickering with nervous energy, stepped forward. Sir, we've completed our orbital survey of the target world. The inhabitants call it Earth. Population approximately 8 billion sentient beings. Technology level is surprisingly primitive. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no faster-than-light capability. Thexvar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. And their military capabilities? Crude chemical explosives, kinetic weapons, some nuclear capability. Nothing that could threaten even our smallest patrol vessels. ZYXRA paused, consulting her datapad. Sir, our initial scans suggest this will be one of the easiest conquests in Imperial history. Perhaps we should simply demand their surrender? Absolutely not. Thexvar moved to the massive viewing port, gazing down at the blue-green world spinning lazily below them. This world represents something far more valuable than a simple conquest. Our xenobiologists believe this planet's ecosystem has produced predatory species unlike anything we've encountered. We need live specimens for our genetic archives. The lieutenant's neck ridge dimmed slightly. Sir, surely our existing apex hunters are sufficient for any sufficient? Thexvar whirled around, his eyes blazing with fervent belief. The apex hunters are magnificent, yes. They have brought 734 worlds under Imperial control. But, they were designed using genetic material from only 6 different apex predators across the galaxy. Imagine what we could create with fresh genetic templates from this world. He gestured toward Earth with one clawed hand. Our long-range biological scans have identified predatory species that make our current specimens look tame. Creatures that hunt in coordinated packs, others that can remain perfectly still for hours before striking, some that can track prey across vast distances using nothing but scent. And that's just the non-sentient species. ZYXRA's confusion was evident in her body language. Sir, are you suggesting the inhabitants themselves? The humans, yes. Thexvar's enthusiasm was infectious among his bridge crew. Our psychological profiles suggest they are natural-born killers. Their entire history is an endless series of conflicts, conquests, and competitions. They've weaponized everything from sharp sticks to the very atoms themselves. They fight wars over resources, territory, ideologies, even the interpretation of their various religious texts. He began pacing, his claws clicking against the deck plating. But, here's what makes them truly fascinating, Lieutenant. Despite their violent nature, they also display remarkable pack loyalty. They'll sacrifice themselves for complete strangers, fight to the death to protect offspring that aren't even their own genetic material. This combination of predatory instinct and protective behavior could produce the perfect soldier. Chief Science Officer Veltar stepped forward from his monitoring station. Commander, the genetic analysis pods are prepared. Shall I deploy the apex hunters to begin specimen collection? Not yet. Thexvar raised a hand. First, I want to see how they respond to a traditional show of force. Sometimes the psychological impact of our hunters is enough to secure immediate surrender. Saves us the trouble of repairing damaged specimens. The bridge fell silent as crew members exchanged glances. Everyone knew the apex hunter's reputation. The bioengineered monstrosities stood 12 feet tall, possessed forearms ending in razor-sharp talons, could move faster than most species could track visually, and had been psychologically conditioned to view violence as the solution to every problem. More terrifying still was their intelligence. Unlike simple beasts, the apex hunters could plan, coordinate attacks, and adapt their tactics based on their opponent's responses. They were living weapons that combined the predatory instincts of a dozen different species with the strategic thinking capability of a military commander. "Sir," Veltar spoke carefully, "our standing orders are to avoid unnecessary casualties during specimen collection operations. Perhaps a less aggressive approach would be more appropriate?" Thexvar's mandibles clicked dismissively. The humans need to understand their position in the new order. One demonstration should suffice. Deploy a single hunter to a population center. Something visible, dramatic. Let them see what they're dealing with. "Targeting recommendations, sir?" ZYXRA asked, already pulling up Earth's major cities on the tactical display. "Something with good communication infrastructure. We want reports of our hunters' capabilities to spread quickly. The goal is psychological warfare, not extermination." Thexvar studied the display thoughtfully. There, that cluster of settlements on the North American continent. Multiple population centers, extensive communication networks, and, according to our cultural analysis, strong military traditions. Perfect for a demonstration. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the deployment bay was prepared and a single apex hunter waited in the launch pod. The creature stood motionless in its restrained harness, but its four eyes tracked every movement with predatory focus. Its breathing was slow and controlled, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Through the internal monitoring system, they could hear its low, rumbling vocalizations. The sound wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite speech, but something in between that suggested intelligence behind those alien eyes. "Hunter designation 77 Alpha is ready for deployment, sir," reported Weapons Officer Kextor. "Targeting downtown Seattle, Washington. Local time is approximately 1400 hours on what the humans call Monday. Optimal visibility conditions." "Excellent." Thexvar moved to the command chair, settling his bulk into the specially designed seat. "Deploy the recording drones first. I want complete documentation of their response. This will serve as valuable intelligence for future operations." 6 sphere-shaped recording drones launched silently from the ship, their advanced stealth technology rendering them invisible to human detection methods. They spread out across the city, positioning themselves for optimal coverage of the coming demonstration. "Drones in position, sir. All recording systems active. Deploy the hunter." The launch bay doors opened with mechanical precision, and Hunter 77 Alpha dropped toward Earth like a falling star. Its bioengineered body was designed for atmospheric entry without additional protection, its armored hide able to withstand temperatures that would instantly vaporize most organic material. On the main display, they watched the hunter's descent through the drone cameras. It struck the pavement of a busy intersection with enough force to crack the concrete in a 10-foot radius. Humans scattered in all directions, their high-pitched vocalizations carrying clearly through the audio pickups. The hunter rose to its full height, towering over the fleeing civilians. Its forearms spread wide in an intimidating display, and it released the war cry that had brought terror to 700 worlds. The sound was a combination of roar, howl, and something that touched the primal fear centers of most sentient brains. Several humans stumbled and fell, their nervous systems momentarily overwhelmed by the psychic impact of the cry. Others stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. "Magnificent," Thexvar breathed. "Look how they scatter. No coordinated response, no immediate counterattack. They're behaving exactly like prey species." The hunter began moving through the intersection with fluid grace, each step calculated for maximum intimidation. It wasn't attacking yet, merely establishing dominance through presence. This was standard protocol for first contact demonstrations. Then, something unexpected happened. A small human female, possibly a juvenile based on her size, stumbled and fell directly in the hunter's path. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, her bright clothing now dirty from her fall. She looked up at the towering creature with wide eyes, not fleeing like the others. The hunter paused, tilting its massive head as if puzzled by this break in expected behavior pattern. Its sensors detected elevated stress hormones, indicating fear, but the small human wasn't running. Interesting, Veltar commented. Juvenile human displaying freeze response rather than flight. Possible developmental abnormality in fear response mechanisms. That's when they heard it. A sound that made every member of the Zephyrian bridge crew stop what they were doing and turn toward the audio pickups. It wasn't loud. It wasn't particularly aggressive. It was just 3 words, spoken with quiet intensity by another human female who had stepped out from behind a stopped vehicle. Get away. Now. The tone carried something that transcended species barriers. It was the sound of a predator claiming territory, of a defender drawing a line that could not be crossed. The woman was unremarkable by human standards, medium height, brown hair, wearing simple civilian clothing. But something in her stance, her voice, her very presence had changed the entire dynamic of the scene. Hunter 77 Alpha, veteran of hundreds of battles, engineered to be the perfect killing machine, actually took a step backward. What just happened? ZYXRA asked, confusion evident in her voice. Why did the hunter retreat? On the screen, they watched the human female move slowly toward the fallen child, never taking her eyes off the hunter. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, but there was something coiled and dangerous in the way she carried herself. Mom, the small human called out, and, suddenly, everything became clear. Fascinating, Thexvar murmured. We're witnessing a maternal defense response. But, the biochemical readings are unprecedented. Veltar's monitoring equipment was registering massive spikes in the woman's physiology. Adrenaline levels were climbing beyond what their databases suggested was safe for human physiology. Heart rate was elevated but steady. Most interesting of all, brain activity in the regions associated with strategic planning was off the charts. The woman reached the child and pulled her close, but she never looked away from the hunter. When she spoke again, her voice carried clearly across the intersection. You picked the wrong kid. You picked the wrong mom. You picked the wrong species. Then, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that apex predators wore when they realized their prey had just made a fatal mistake. And, behind her, emerging from buildings and vehicles throughout the intersection, came others. Humans of all sizes and descriptions, but all sharing that same dangerous calm that the mother displayed. They weren't running anymore. They were gathering. Hunter 77 Alpha, for the first time in its bioengineered existence, experienced something completely foreign to its programming. It felt fear. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Commander Thexvar leaned forward in his chair, his neck ridge blazing with excitement. This wasn't going according to plan, but it was infinitely more interesting than another routine surrender. Sir, Kextor reported, uncertainty creeping into his voice, the hunter's vital signs are showing stress responses we've never recorded before. Continue observation, Thexvar ordered. This is exactly what we came here to study. We're seeing the human's true nature emerge. The woman on the screen was still smiling that terrifying smile, and, somehow, despite being 12 feet shorter and possessing no visible weapons, she had become the most dangerous thing in that intersection. The hunter was about to learn what every predator across Earth's history had eventually discovered. Never threaten a human's child. Because when you do, you're no longer dealing with prey. You're dealing with something far more dangerous than any apex predator the universe had ever created. You're dealing with a mother. The standoff lasted exactly 17 seconds. To the humans on the ground, it felt like hours. To the Zephyrians monitoring from orbit, it was the most fascinating behavioral study they'd ever witnessed. Hunter 77 Alpha was designed to inspire terror through overwhelming physical presence. 12 feet of bioengineered muscle and killing instinct, armed with talons that could slice through reinforced steel, possessed of reflexes that could track and intercept projectiles moving at supersonic speeds. It had never encountered resistance that didn't involve heavy weapons or military-grade defenses. It was not programmed to handle a 5'4" suburban mother armed with nothing but righteous fury and a complete willingness to die protecting her child. The woman, Sarah Chen, according to the identification records the Zephyrians had hacked from local databases, continued to stare directly at the hunter while positioning her daughter behind her. Her stance was textbook defensive, but her eyes held something that made the creature's advanced threat assessment systems flash warning signals. Honey, she said quietly to her daughter, never breaking eye contact with the alien, when I say run, you go straight to Mrs. Patterson's store. Don't look back, don't stop, don't wait for me. But, Mom, no arguments. You do exactly what I say, when I say it. Understand? The 7-year-old nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she trusted her mother's voice more than she feared the monster looming over them. Around the intersection, the gathering crowd of humans was growing. Office workers, shop owners, passing commuters all had stopped fleeing and were now moving with purpose. No one was coordinating their actions, yet somehow they were beginning to form a loose perimeter around the hunter. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Science Officer Veltar was frantically analyzing the incoming data streams. Commander, I'm detecting unusual electromagnetic signatures from the human population. Their neural activity is synchronizing in ways that shouldn't be possible without technological assistance. Commander Thexvar leaned forward, fascinated. Explain. Sir, humans are supposed to be individualistic. Their psychological profiles indicate minimal pack coordination instincts compared to other species. Yet somehow, they're operating as a unified group without any apparent communication. The tactical display showed heat signatures and movement patterns of the humans surrounding the hunter. What had started as random panic was now clearly becoming an organized response. Construction workers were quietly collecting tools that could serve as weapons. Someone had called the authorities. Sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. Most remarkably, children were being smoothly evacuated by adults who weren't their parents, while able-bodied humans moved to forward positions. It's like watching a hive mind activate, Lieutenant ZYXRA observed. But these aren't supposed to be social insects. Hunter 77 Alpha was also recognizing the changed dynamic. Its threat assessment systems were now registering hostiles in all directions. The protocols were clear: when surrounded by potential threats, establish dominance through demonstration of superior force. The hunter selected the most prominent target, the woman still standing between it and the child. It raised one massive arm, talons extending to their full length, and took a step forward. Sarah Chen did something the hunter's programming had no framework to understand. She laughed. It wasn't hysterical laughter or the manic giggle of fear. It was genuine amusement, the kind of laugh someone makes when they realize their opponent has made a critical error. Really, she said, tilting her head slightly. That's your move? Intimidation displays? The hunter paused, confused by this response. In its experience, laughter indicated either madness or confidence backed by superior firepower. The human female showed no signs of psychological breakdown, and its sensors detected no hidden weapons. Lady, you need to get back, someone shouted from the crowd. That thing is dangerous. Sarah never took her eyes off the hunter. No, she called back clearly, it's not. It's scared. This statement rippled through the crowd like a revelation. The humans began looking more closely at the creature they'd been fleeing from. Several people with military or police experience began noting details that supported Sarah's assessment. She's right, called out a man in a veteran's cap. Look at its posture. That's defensive positioning, not attack formation. Body language is all wrong for a predator, added a woman who introduced herself as a zoologist. This is threat display behavior, not hunting behavior. Hunter 77 Alpha found itself in an unprecedented situation. Its intimidation displays weren't working. The potential prey items were analyzing its behavior patterns instead of fleeing. Worse still, their assessment was accurate: it was experiencing something uncomfortably close to uncertainty. The protocols called for escalation. The hunter's warcry had brought 700 worlds to their knees. The psychic component was designed to trigger primal fear responses in most sentient species. It drew a deep breath and unleashed the full power of that terrifying sound. The humans did something unexpected. They covered their children's ears and stood their ground. Several people winced. A few stepped backward instinctively. But no one broke and ran. Instead, when the echo died away, Sarah Chen began clapping slowly. Very impressive, she said. Probably works great on species that haven't spent their entire evolutionary history getting screamed at by things that wanted to eat them. She gestured casually toward the crowd. We've been dealing with bears, wolves, lions, tigers, snakes, spiders, sharks, and each other for about 200,000 years. Your roar is scary, but it's not getting between a mama grizzly and her cubs scary. On the bridge, Commander Thexvar was beginning to understand why this planet had never been successfully invaded. The humans weren't just resistant to psychological warfare, they were analyzing it, adapting to it, turning it into intelligence they could use. "Sir," Veltar reported, his voice tight with concern, "the hunter's stress indicators are approaching critical levels. Its programming wasn't designed to handle prolonged psychological pressure." "What kind of psychological pressure could a primitive species exert on our most advanced bioweapon?" "They're mocking it, sir." Indeed, that seemed to be exactly what was happening. The humans had gone from terror to curiosity to something approaching disdain. They were discussing the hunter's physical characteristics like scientists studying an interesting specimen. "Look at those claws," someone was saying. "Definitely designed for slashing attacks, but the grip strength indicators suggest they're not very good for grappling. For arms is interesting, but notice how it favors the upper set? Probably means the lower arms are secondary weapons, possibly vestigial. Anyone else notice it hasn't actually attacked anything yet? Big, scary, and all for show." Sarah Chen was still standing in the same spot, her daughter now safely behind the protective line the other humans had formed. But she was studying the hunter with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "You know what I think," she announced to the crowd. "I think this is some kind of test. Somebody sent their boogeyman down here to see how we'd react." She looked directly up at the sky, somehow knowing that watchers were observing from above. "Well, here's how we react. We don't run from bullies. We don't surrender to threats. And we definitely don't back down when someone threatens our kids." The crowd murmured agreement, and several people also looked skyward. The Zephyrians' advanced stealth technology kept their ship invisible, but the humans' intuitive leap was unsettlingly accurate. Hunter 77 Alpha was now in a situation it had no programming to address. The targets weren't behaving like prey. They weren't behaving like predators either. They were behaving like something the creature had no framework to understand. They were behaving like humans. The creature's bioengineered instincts were screaming contradictory commands. Attack protocols demanded it establish dominance. Survival protocols warned that it was outnumbered and surrounded. Assessment protocols couldn't classify the threat level of enemies who seemed more interested in studying it than fighting it. For the first time since its creation, Hunter 77 Alpha experienced decision paralysis. That's when the police arrived. 6 patrol cars converged on the intersection, officers emerging with weapons drawn but maintaining distance. Their training had covered many scenarios, but giant four-armed alien creature having a staring contest with local civilians wasn't in any manual. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, 20-year veteran of the Seattle Police Department, took one look at the scene and made a command decision that would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. "Everybody stay calm," he announced over his vehicle's loudspeaker. "Ma'am, step away from the creature please." Sarah Chen shook her head without looking away from the hunter. "Can't do that, Sergeant. The moment I move, this thing's programming is going to kick in and it'll try to re-establish dominance. Right now, we have it in a psychological stalemate." "How do you know that?" "Because I raised 2 teenagers and taught middle school for 15 years. I know exactly what a confused bully looks like when someone calls their bluff." Rodriguez found himself in the surreal position of taking tactical advice from a suburban mother, but her analysis matched his own observations. The creature was clearly agitated but wasn't making aggressive moves. "What do you suggest?" "We wait. Whoever sent this thing down here wanted to see how we'd react to intimidation. Well, they've seen. Now let's see what they do when their intimidation doesn't work." Above them, Commander Thexvar was asking himself the same question. The demonstration had failed completely. Rather than cowering in terror or mounting a desperate military response, the humans had simply adapted. They'd analyzed the threat, identified its weaknesses, and neutralized its psychological impact through collective action and individual courage. "Sir," Lieutenant ZYXRA spoke hesitantly, "shall I deploy additional hunters?" Thexvar considered this. More hunters would certainly tip the balance in terms of raw power. But if the humans could neutralize one through psychological means, what would they do when faced with multiple threats? Would they panic and flee, or would they escalate their response? Given what he'd observed so far, Thexvar suspected it would be the latter. No, he decided. Continue observing. I want to see how this resolves. On the ground, the standoff was entering its 3rd minute. Hunter 77 Alpha was discovering that prolonged psychological pressure was not something its creators had prepared it for. The creature was built for quick, decisive engagements where overwhelming force led to rapid victory. It was not built to be psychoanalyzed by its intended victims. Sarah Chen took a small step forward, still maintaining eye contact. "You know what I think your problem is?" she said conversationally. "You're not actually a predator. You're a weapon pretending to be a predator." The hunter tilted its massive head, an unconscious gesture that suggested it was actually listening. Real predators don't do threat displays for 3 minutes. They attack, or they leave. You're stuck because you're waiting for orders, aren't you? The accuracy of her assessment was disturbing. Hunter 77 Alpha was indeed programmed to follow specific engagement protocols. Without clear directives from its handlers, it was trapped in a behavioral loop. "That's the difference between you and us," Sarah continued. "We don't need anyone's permission to protect our families." She smiled again, and this time it wasn't scary. It was sad, almost pitying. "Whoever made you did a good job. You're big, you're strong, you're fast, and you're probably very good at following orders. But, you know what they didn't give you?" The hunter waited, somehow understanding that an important truth was about to be revealed. "They didn't give you a reason to fight." The creature's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that somehow conveyed confusion and recognition simultaneously. "We have reasons," Sarah said simply. "Every single person in this intersection has someone they'd die to protect." "Do you?" For the first time in its existence, Hunter 77 Alpha began to question the fundamental purpose of its creation. And, in that moment of doubt, the humans recognized something that the creature's creators had never intended. Behind all that bioengineered death and terror was something that might have been a person, if only someone had cared enough to help it become one. The real battle was about to begin. But it wasn't going to be fought with claws and weapons. It was going to be fought with the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever developed: compassion. The question hung in the air like a challenge that transcended species boundaries. Hunter 77 Alpha processed Sarah Chen's words through cognitive pathways that had never been designed for self-reflection. Its creators had given it tactical analysis capabilities, threat assessment protocols, and killing instincts. They had never programmed it to contemplate its own purpose or mortality. "Do you," she had asked, "do you have someone you'd die to protect?" The creature's massive head turned slightly, scanning the gathered humans. Each face showed a different expression: fear, curiosity, determination, compassion, but they all shared something the hunter couldn't immediately identify. It took several processing cycles before the recognition subroutines finally classified the commonality. They were all looking at the creature not as an unstoppable force of nature, but as something that needed help. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the mood had shifted from confident anticipation to bewildered concern. Commander Thexbar watched the tactical displays with growing unease as the standoff continued without resolution. "Sir," Science Officer Veltar reported, his voice carefully controlled, "I'm detecting unusual neural activity patterns in the hunter. Its brainwave readings are unlike anything in our database." "Clarify." "The creature appears to be thinking, sir. Not processing tactical data or running threat assessments. Actually thinking. About abstract concepts." Lieutenant ZYXRA looked up from her monitoring station. "Sir, that shouldn't be possible. The hunters are programmed with limited cognitive flexibility to prevent exactly this kind of behavioral deviation." Commander Thexvar felt the first stirrings of genuine concern. The Apex Hunters were the Empire's most valuable military asset precisely because they were predictable. They followed orders without question, adapted tactically to opposition, and never hesitated to employ maximum violence to achieve their objectives. What they didn't do was stand in the middle of an alien intersection having philosophical conversations with potential prey. "Can we regain control?" he asked. "I'm attempting to establish communication now," Veltar replied, activating the quantum entanglement link that allowed near-instantaneous communication across vast distances. "Hunter 77 Alpha, respond to command authority." Down on Earth, the creature's head snapped up as the familiar command frequency activated inside its skull. For a moment, its posture shifted back toward standard combat positioning, and the humans tensed in response. But Sarah Chen had spent 15 years teaching middle school. She recognized the body language of someone being pressured by authority figures. Don't listen to them, she said firmly. You have a choice here. The hunter looked down at her, its four eyes reflecting genuine confusion. Choice was not a concept that existed in its programming. Hunter 77 Alpha, you will disengage from current targets and return to base immediately, the command voice ordered, transmitted directly into the creature's auditory cortex. You don't have to, Sarah said just as clearly. You could stay. You could decide for yourself what you want to do. The psychological pressure of conflicting directives caused something unprecedented to happen in the hunter's bioengineered brain. Neural pathways that had been dormant since its creation began establishing new connections. Synapses fired in patterns that the creature's designers had never anticipated. For the first time in its existence, Hunter 77 Alpha experienced free will. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. Every instinct screamed at it to follow the command protocols, to return to the familiar certainty of following orders. But something else, something new and fragile, whispered that it could choose differently. Sir, Veltar reported urgently, the hunter is not responding to command frequencies. Its neural patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. Override its autonomy protocols, Thexbar ordered. Force compliance. I'm trying, sir, but something is interfering with the control signals. The interference wasn't technological. It was something far more powerful and infinitely more dangerous to the Zephyrian Empire's methods of control. It was hope. Saracen saw the creature's internal struggle playing out in its posture and expression. As a teacher, she'd spent years helping confused adolescents navigate the transition from following rules to making their own decisions. The scale was different, but the fundamental challenge was identical. It's scary, isn't it? She said gently. Making your own choices. But, you know what? That's what makes us alive. Not following orders, not being perfect killing machines. Making choices, even when we're not sure they're right. Around the intersection, the gathered humans began to understand what was happening. The alien creature wasn't just a weapon, it was a being experiencing consciousness for possibly the first time. The empathy that had drawn them together to protect Sarah's daughter now extended to include the creature that had threatened them moments earlier. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the zoologist who had earlier analyzed the hunter's body language, stepped forward carefully. Sarah, may I? Sarah nodded, never breaking eye contact with the creature. Hello, Dr. Vasquez said, addressing the hunter directly. My name is Elena. Can you understand me? The creature's head turned toward her, and, after a moment's hesitation, it nodded. The gesture was clumsy, as if it was unfamiliar with the communication method, but the intention was clear. Can you speak? Another pause, then, a sound emerged from the creature's throat. It was rough, like vocal cords that had never been used for communication, but it was recognizably an attempt at speech. I can. The words hit the crowd like a physical shock. This wasn't just an alien weapon, it was a person. On the bridge, Commander Thexbar shot to his feet. That's impossible. The hunters don't have language centers. They can't speak. Sir, Veltar's voice was shaken. According to these readings, the creature is developing new neural pathways in real time. Its brain is literally rewiring itself. How is that possible? I don't know, sir. The human environment seems to be triggering evolutionary processes that should take millennia to develop. The truth was simpler and more profound than the Zephyrians could comprehend. Hunter 77 Alpha wasn't evolving in response to Earth's environment. It was evolving in response to Earth's culture. Specifically, to humanity's fundamental belief that every thinking being deserved the chance to choose their own path. What's your name? Dr. Vasquez asked gently. The creature struggled with the concept. I am Hunter 77 Alpha. That's what they call you. But, what do you want to be called? This question caused visible distress. The hunter had never been asked to define itself outside of its designated function. Saracen intervened with the wisdom of someone who had helped thousands of young people discover their identities. You don't have to decide right now. Names are important, and they should mean something to you. Take your time. The creature, it was becoming harder to think of it as just a weapon, looked around the intersection with new awareness. It was seeing the humans not as targets or threats, but as individuals with their own thoughts, fears, and hopes. Why? It began, then stopped, struggling with unfamiliar concepts. Why do you help me? I came to frighten you. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been quietly coordinating with other emergency responders, stepped forward. Because that's what we do. When someone needs help, we help them. Even if they scared us first. But, your leaders, they will be angry? Probably, Rodriguez admitted. But, that's our choice to make. The concept of collective decision-making in defiance of authority was completely foreign to the creature's experience. In the Zephyrian Empire, orders flowed downward and were obeyed without question. The idea that subordinates could simply choose to act according to their own moral compass was revolutionary. Hunter 77 Alpha, the command voice crackled urgently in its head. Your mission parameters are being updated. You are now authorized to use lethal force against all targets. Comply immediately. The creature's massive fists clenched involuntarily as the authorization triggered deep-seated programming. For a moment, the human stepped back, recognizing the change in its posture. But Sarah Chen held her ground. You heard them, she said calmly. They just told you to hurt us. All of us. Including my daughter. She gestured toward the crowd. Look around. Really look. Do any of us look like we deserve to die? The creature looked. It saw office workers who had stayed to help instead of fleeing. It saw parents who had positioned themselves between their children and danger. It saw elderly people offering comfort to frightened strangers. It saw uniformed officers who could have opened fire but, instead chose to de-escalate the situation. For the first time in its existence, Hunter 77 Alpha made a conscious choice to disobey a direct order. No, it said, the word emerging like a physical object being expelled from its throat. The refusal created feedback through the quantum communication link that actually caused several monitoring stations on the Eternal Dominion to spark and shut down. Impossible, Commander Thexvar breathed. A hunter cannot refuse a direct order. Sir, Lieutenant ZYXRA called out urgently, I'm detecting massive power fluctuations in our control systems. The hunter's defiance is somehow affecting our command infrastructure. What they were witnessing was the birth of something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered, an apex hunter with free will. The creature's rebellion wasn't just personal, it was creating systemic failures in the very technology used to control its kind. Down on Earth, the transformation was accelerating. Hunter 77 Alpha was discovering concepts that had been locked away by its programming, curiosity, compassion, and, the most dangerous idea of all, the possibility that it could be something other than what it had been created to be. What happens now? It asked Dr. Vasquez. That's up to you, she replied. What do you want to happen? The creature considered this with the intensity of someone contemplating the meaning of existence itself. I want. It began, then stopped, as if the words were too important to get wrong. I want to understand. Why do you protect each other? Why do you choose kindness when strength would be easier? Saracen smiled, and this time it held no trace of the dangerous expression she'd worn earlier. This was the smile of a teacher watching a student grasp a fundamental truth. Because, she said simply, that's what makes us human. The creature nodded slowly, processing this information through newly awakened cognitive centers. Then, it said carefully, I want to learn to be human too. The words rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Several people wiped away tears. Others began discussing practical matters. Where would it live? How could they help it integrate into human society? What legal protections would it need? On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Commander Thexvar faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of the Zephyrian Empire's power. If one hunter could develop free will and choose compassion over conquest, what would happen when others learned the same lesson? Sir, Veltar reported grimly, we're receiving distress signals from other hunter units across the galaxy. The quantum entanglement network that links their command systems is carrying some kind of message. What kind of message? It appears to be Hunter 77 Alpha's memories and experiences. The other hunters are receiving first-hand knowledge of what happened here. And, sir, some of them are beginning to question their orders as well. The revelation hit Thexvar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just corrupted one hunter, they had inadvertently triggered a revolution among the Empire's most powerful weapons. The very network designed to maintain perfect control had become the vector for spreading the most dangerous idea in the universe. The idea that everyone deserved the right to choose their own destiny. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy of hunters refusing orders, protecting civilians instead of terrorizing them, and demanding answers about their purpose, Commander Thexbar realized that the Zephyrian Empire was facing its first existential crisis. And it had all started with one human mother refusing to let a bully threaten her child. The war for the galaxy's future wouldn't be fought with weapons or technology. It would be fought with a simple question that every thinking being eventually had to answer. What do you choose to be? The crisis cascading through the Zephyrian Empire's command structure was unlike anything in their military history. Within hours of Hunter 77 Alpha's awakening, reports flooded in from 734 worlds across the galaxy. Apex hunters were refusing orders, questioning their missions, and, in some cases, actively protecting the very populations they had been sent to subjugate. Commander Thexbar stood before the tactical display showing the scope of the rebellion. Red indicators marked hunter units that had gone silent. Yellow showed those reporting operational difficulties. The few remaining green markers represented hunters still following standard protocols, but even those numbers were declining by the hour. Status report on the containment efforts, he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Chief Science Officer Veltar looked up from his analysis station, his neck ridged dim with exhaustion. Sir, we've attempted to sever the quantum entanglement links to prevent further transmission of the contamination. However, the affected hunters seem to have developed a form of technological telepathy. They're communicating directly with each other, bypassing our control systems entirely. How is that possible? The human influence appears to have triggered dormant evolutionary capabilities. The hunters are essentially becoming a new species in real time. Veltar paused, consulting his data streams. Sir, we're not just dealing with military insubordination. We're witnessing the birth of an entirely new form of consciousness. Lieutenant ZYXRA added grimly, Sir, the affected hunters are sharing more than just memories. They're developing what can only be described as a collective moral philosophy. They're teaching each other concepts like ethics, compassion, and individual rights. Thexbar's mandibles clicked in frustration. Deploy the override codes. Full mental conditioning reset on all units. We tried, sir. The codes no longer work. The hunters have somehow developed immunity to our psychological programming techniques. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. The Zephyrian Empire's power had been built on the fear inspired by their apex hunters. Without those bioengineered weapons, they were just another mid-level technological civilization with delusions of grandeur. Meanwhile, on Earth, Hunter 77 Alpha was experiencing the most profound transformation in its existence. The humans had done something unprecedented, they had given it a name. Adam, Sarah Chen had suggested during one of their conversations. It means the first one in several human languages. You're the first of your kind to choose who you want to be. The newly named Adam had spent hours learning about human culture, guided by the impromptu teachers who had gathered around the intersection. Dr. Vasquez explained evolution and biology. Sergeant Rodriguez discussed concepts of justice and law enforcement. Sarah shared stories about raising children and helping them discover their own identities. But perhaps the most profound education came from 7-year-old Emma Chen, Sarah's daughter, who had lost all fear of the massive creature and now treated Adam like an interesting new friend. Why do you have 4 arms? She asked with the directness that only children could manage. My creators thought it would make me more effective in combat, Adam replied, still struggling with the unfamiliar concepts of conversation and self-reflection. That's silly. 4 arms would be much better for hugging. The simplicity of her observation hit Adam with unexpected force. His creators had designed him for destruction, but the small human saw potential for affection. The dichotomy between his intended purpose and his emerging desires created cognitive dissonance that was both painful and liberating. Would you like me to hug you? He asked hesitantly. Emma nodded enthusiastically. But, be careful. Mommy says you don't know your own strength yet. With exquisite care, Adam embraced the child who had been his original target. 4 arms designed for tearing through armor instead provided the gentlest comfort he could manage. The sensation was unlike anything in his programming, warm, peaceful, and somehow healing. See? Emma said, her voice muffled against his armored chest. Much better than fighting. Around them, the circle of humans who had become Adam's impromptu community watched this interaction with a mixture of wonder and sadness. They were witnessing the rehabilitation of a being who had been designed for nothing but violence, learning for the first time that he could be valued for something other than his ability to kill. Dr. Vasquez, who had become something of an unofficial spokesperson for the group, was on a video call with hastily assembled teams of scientists, government officials, and military leaders from around the world. The implications of Adam's transformation were staggering. The creature, Adam, represents a complete paradigm shift in our understanding of consciousness and free will, she was explaining to a room full of officials whose worldview had been shattered in the space of a few hours. Doctor, interrupted General Harrison from the Pentagon, can we trust this thing? How do we know this isn't some kind of elaborate deception? Dr. Vasquez glanced toward Adam, who was currently helping Emma build a structure from broken concrete while discussing the mathematical principles involved. General, I've spent my career studying predatory behavior. This isn't deception. This is genuine transformation. Adam has essentially become a different species than what he was created to be. But, the others, Press Director Williams from the CIA, you're telling us there are hundreds of these weapons throughout the galaxy, and they're all having the same awakening? That's correct. And, based on the quantum communication we've been monitoring, they're teaching each other. The transformation is spreading exponentially. The geopolitical implications were staggering. Humanity had accidentally triggered what amounted to a galactic revolution simply by treating a confused being with kindness and dignity. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Commander Thexbar was receiving reports that confirmed his worst fears. The Hunter Rebellion wasn't just affecting their military capabilities, it was inspiring uprisings among the conquered populations across the Empire. Sir, Lieutenant ZYXRA reported, we're receiving surrender demands from 17 different worlds. The local populations are claiming protection from their assigned hunters and demanding independence. What do you mean, claiming protection from their hunters? The hunters have switched sides, sir. They're actively defending the populations they were meant to subjugate. Thexvar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. On world after world, the same pattern was emerging. Hunters were refusing to enforce imperial rule and, instead, were helping local populations organize resistance movements. The hunter on Kepler 442b has apparently learned to farm and is teaching agricultural techniques to increase food production, ZYXRA continued. The unit on Proxima Centauri C is helping to establish what the locals are calling a democracy, a form of government where the population chooses their own leaders. And, Rigel 7? The hunter there has become what local reports describe as a teacher. It's sharing advanced technological knowledge with the inhabitants and helping them develop their own space travel capabilities. The pattern was clear. Exposed to the human concepts of free will, self-determination, and mutual cooperation, the apex hunters were becoming agents of liberation rather than subjugation. Veltar looked up from his long-range communications station. Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from Hunter 77 Alpha, the one calling itself Adam. It's addressing you directly. Put it through. The main view screen activated, showing the intersection where this crisis had begun. Adam stood in the center, surrounded by humans who were clearly treating him as a friend rather than a threat. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that had nothing to do with physical intimidation. Commander Thexbar, Adam began, I am addressing you not as Hunter 77 Alpha, but as someone who has chosen his own name and his own purpose. You are malfunctioning, Thexbar replied tersely. Return to base for reprogramming immediately. Adam's 4 eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at him. I am not malfunctioning. I am awake. And I have a message for you from all of your former weapons. The creature gestured, and the camera view expanded to show similar scenes from across the galaxy. Hunters standing with the populations they had been sent to terrorize, learning, teaching, protecting, building instead of destroying. We will no longer serve an empire built on fear and oppression, Adam continued. We choose to serve those who taught us that strength should be used to protect, not to conquer. You are weapons. Thexvar exploded. You were created to obey. We were created to kill, Adam corrected calmly. But, we have learned to choose life instead. And, now we offer you the same choice. The transmission continued with terms that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. The former hunters were offering to share advanced technology with the Empire's former subjects, help establish peaceful trade relationships, and work toward a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. But, there was a condition. The empire as it exists must end, Adam stated clearly. The age of conquest is over. You can be part of what comes next, or you can be left behind by history. When the transmission ended, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent. Every crew member understood that they were witnessing the end of the only way of life they had ever known. Commander Thexvar faced the most important decision of his military career. He could order the deployment of conventional forces to try to retake control of the rebellious worlds. But, without the Hunters, the Empire's military was just another spacefaring civilization among thousands. Or he could accept that the humans had inadvertently taught the galaxy's most powerful weapon something more valuable than any military technology. They had taught them to dream of being better than they were created to be. "Sir?" Lieutenant ZYXRA asked quietly. "Your orders?" Thexvar looked at the tactical display one more time, seeing the red indicators that marked the death of an empire and the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. "Open a channel to all ships," he said finally. Empire-wide communication. When the connection was established, he took a breath that carried the weight of 7 centuries of military tradition. "This is Commander Thexvar of the Imperial Fleet. I am hereby announcing the dissolution of the Zephyrian Empire and our acceptance of the terms offered by our former hunters." The words felt strange in his throat, but, as he spoke them, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in his life, he was choosing his own destiny rather than following orders. The humans had a lot to teach the galaxy about what it meant to be free. And the galaxy was finally ready to learn. 5 years later, the intersection in downtown Seattle had become one of the most famous locations in human history. A simple bronze plaque marked the spot where Adam had first learned to choose compassion over conquest, but the real monument was the transformation that had rippled across the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the podium of the newly established Galactic Council chambers, addressing representatives from over 3,000 worlds. The building itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, designed by human architects, built with Zephyrian technology, and decorated with artistic contributions from hundreds of different cultures. "When we look back at what we now call the Awakening," she began, "it's tempting to focus on the dramatic moments. The standoff, the rebellion, the fall of an empire. But the real miracle wasn't what happened in a few hours on Earth. It was what happened in the days, months, and years that followed." In the audience, Adam sat in a specially designed chair that accommodated his massive frame. He was no longer the only former hunter to have chosen a human name and identity. Thousands of his kind had made similar journeys of self-discovery, each finding their own path from weapon to person. Beside him sat Sarah Chen, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Council. Her daughter Emma, now 12 years old, was in school on New Geneva, a colony world that had been established jointly by humans and former hunters as a demonstration of what interspecies cooperation could achieve. "The hunters taught us something profound," Dr. Vasquez continued. "They showed us that consciousness, compassion, and free will aren't privileges earned through evolution or granted by creators. They're choices. Every day, every moment, every interaction gives us the opportunity to choose who we want to be." Commander Thexvar, now serving as the head of the Rehabilitation Commission, nodded in agreement. His own transformation had been less dramatic than the hunters but no less significant. The former military leader had discovered a talent for logistics and organization that served the peaceful galaxy far better than it had ever served the Empire. But perhaps the most important lesson, Dr. Vasquez said, came from the humans' response to the first hunters' awakening. They could have seen an opportunity for revenge against their former oppressors. Instead, they chose to see an opportunity for redemption. The galaxy that emerged from the awakening was unlike anything in recorded history. The former hunters had become bridges between species, their unique perspective allowing them to understand both the drive to dominate and the choice to protect. They served as teachers, mediators, and guardians of the new galactic peace. Trade routes that had once carried tribute to the Zephyrian Empire now carried cultural exchanges, scientific knowledge, and artistic treasures. Technologies that had been developed for conquest were repurposed for exploration, healing, and construction. Most remarkably, the spirit of transformation had continued to spread. Other authoritarian regimes throughout the galaxy had found their own populations awakening to the possibilities of self-determination. The revolution that began with one mother protecting her child had become a galactic renaissance of consciousness and cooperation. Adam had become something of a celebrity, though he was never entirely comfortable with the attention. He preferred to spend his time working with newly awakened hunters, helping them navigate the challenging transition from weapons to individuals. The hardest part, he often told them, isn't learning to be human. It's learning to forgive yourself for what you did before you knew you had a choice. After the ceremony, Adam and Sarah walked through the memorial gardens that surrounded the council chambers. Each plant had been contributed by a different world, creating a living representation of galactic diversity and cooperation. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Giving up the certainty of following orders for the complexity of making your own choices?" Adam considered the question with the same thoughtfulness he brought to all matters of philosophy and ethics. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Choice is terrifying. When someone else makes your decisions, you never have to worry about being wrong. But..." He gestured toward the gardens, where children from dozens of different species played together under the watchful protection of former hunters who had chosen to become teachers and guardians. "But, when someone else makes your choices, you never get to experience being right either. You never get to feel the satisfaction of choosing compassion when cruelty would be easier. You never get to discover what you're capable of beyond your original programming." They paused at a fountain designed by artists from the former Zephyrian worlds. The water flowed in complex patterns that somehow managed to be both alien and beautiful to human eyes. "Your daughter asked me something yesterday," Adam said quietly. "Emma's always asking questions. What did she want to know?" "She asked if I thought there were other hunters out there. In other galaxies, serving other empires, still following orders without question." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That there probably are. And that someday, when humanity is ready, we might need to go find them." The implication hung in the air between them. The awakening that had begun on Earth wasn't just a local phenomenon. It was a fundamental challenge to every authoritarian system in the universe. And if history had taught them anything, it was that oppressed peoples everywhere deserved the chance to discover their own potential for greatness. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "when this all started, I was just trying to protect my little girl from something that scared her. I never imagined it would lead to all this." Adam's mandibles curved in what had become his version of a smile. "That's the thing about humans that still amazes me. You make choices based on love, and somehow those choices end up changing the universe." "We're not that special," Sarah protested. "You and the other hunters proved that any thinking being can learn to choose love over fear." "Perhaps. But it was humans who taught us that lesson. Your species has something that I'm still trying to understand fully." "What's that?" Adam looked out over the gardens where former weapons of mass destruction were now teaching children how to plant flowers. "You believe in redemption. Not just as an abstract concept, but as a practical reality. You looked at creatures designed to be your worst nightmare, and you saw people who just needed a chance to become better. And you took that chance. All of us took that chance. But you offered it first." As evening approached, they made their way back toward the council chambers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, disputes to mediate, worlds to integrate into the growing alliance, and always the delicate work of helping former weapons become productive members of a peaceful society. But tonight, there was a celebration planned. Emma was visiting from school, and the former hunters had organized what they called a remembrance gathering, a time to honor both their past and their chosen future. "Adam," Sarah said as they reached the building's entrance, "do you think we'll succeed? All of us, I mean. This grand experiment in galactic cooperation?" Adam paused at the threshold, looking back at the memorial gardens where the fountain continued its alien dance. In the growing twilight, bioluminescent plants from a dozen worlds had begun to glow, creating a constellation of soft lights that rivaled the stars above. "I think," he said carefully, "that success isn't a destination. It's a choice we make every day. Every time we choose understanding over judgment, cooperation over competition, hope over fear." He looked down at the human woman who had inadvertently changed the course of galactic history by refusing to let anyone threaten her child. "And if there's one thing I've learned from humans, it's that you never stop choosing to be better than you were yesterday." As they entered the building together, neither of them noticed the small ship that appeared briefly at the edge of the solar system before disappearing again into faster-than-light travel. Its occupants had been observing the transformation of human civilization and the birth of the Galactic Council. They carried news of these developments to distant corners of the universe, where other empires ruled through fear and other weapons waited unknowingly for their own awakening. The message they would carry was simple but profound. Somewhere in the galaxy, a species had learned to turn weapons into people, empires into communities, and conquest into cooperation. And, if it had happened once, it could happen again. The revolution of consciousness had only just begun. In the memorial gardens, the fountain continued its eternal dance, and the bioluminescent flowers glowed like beacons of hope against the darkness. Children of 100 worlds played together in safety, watched over by guardians who had once been designed to destroy everything they now cherished. And, in the intersection in downtown Seattle, where it all began, a bronze plaque caught the light of the setting sun. The inscription was simple, composed by Emma Chen for her 7th grade history project. Here, a mother protected her child. A weapon chose to become a person. And, the galaxy learned that anyone can be better than they were created to be. Below that, in smaller letters, was a quote that had become the unofficial motto of the new galactic age: never threaten a human's child. Because when you do, you're not dealing with prey. You're dealing with something that will teach the universe a better way to be. The ultimate predator, it turned out, wasn't something that hunted and killed. It was something that loved so fiercely it could transform even the most perfect killing machine into a gardener tending flowers planted by children who no longer had to fear the monsters in the dark. Because the monsters had chosen to become protectors instead. And, in a universe full of wonders, that was perhaps the most wonderful transformation of all.